The day I realized my neighbors would rather erase my memories than let me heal was the day I became their problem. All I had was a single tree, a tree planted in honor of the man I loved for 40 years. A tree that shaded the bench where I still whispered goodnight to him. A tree that reminded me that life, no matter how cruel, could still grow. And yet, that very tree became a battlefield. The letter came on a Thursday morning. It was a bland piece of paper, tucked neatly into an envelope stamped Homeowners Association. I almost ignored it, but curiosity tugged at me, and I tore it open. What I read didn't just take my breath away. It nearly broke me. Violation notice. Unauthorized landscaping. Immediate removal required. Non-compliance will result in fines and further action. They were talking about my tree. My husband's tree. I read the line twice, then 3 times, hoping I'd misunderstood. But no, they weren't asking me to trim it. They weren't asking me to relocate it. They were demanding that I destroy it. I sat frozen at my kitchen table, the paper trembling in my hands. For a moment, I thought of calling someone, maybe the HOA president herself, maybe a lawyer. But then another thought came. What would my husband say if he saw this? I could almost hear his voice, calm but firm, the way it always was when life tested us. Don't let them push you around, Lily. Don't let them take what's ours. But it wasn't just ours anymore. That tree had roots deeper than any rule book, and they were tangled with memories, birthdays, anniversaries, quiet mornings on the porch where we held coffee cups and watched the sunrise. It wasn't a tree. It was a monument. And now the HOA wanted it gone because their words wasn't on the approved landscaping list. Imagine that. 40 years of love reduced to a line item in a binder. I walked outside and stood before the tree, my heart hammering. The morning sun filtered through its leaves, scattering light across the grass. I thought of the day I planted it, alone, with shaky hands, burying the sapling in the soil still damp with tears. I told myself it would be a living tribute, a promise that even though he was gone, part of him would keep growing. Now, staring at it, I felt something shift inside me. Grief turned into something else, something harder, anger. The HOA could write their notices, flex their power, send their threats. But what they didn't understand was this. You can't bully a widow out of her love. That tree wasn't just wood and leaves. It was my fight. And if they wanted to fight, well, they just found one. From that moment forward, I knew I wasn't just defending a tree. I was defending my husband's memory. I was defending every quiet moment of comfort that tree had given me. I was defending myself. The HOA thought this would be easy. A letter, a demand, a fine. But they didn't know me. They didn't know how much I had already survived. What could they possibly do to me that life hadn't already done? I folded the violation notice and slipped it into a drawer, but not before scribbling a note across the bottom. 3 words, written in ink as permanent as my resolve. This isn't over. That was the beginning. The day a tree became a war. The day grief turned into defiance. The day I stopped being their compliant neighbor and became their worst nightmare. What they didn't realize was that they had given me something I hadn't felt in months. A reason to stand, a reason to fight, a reason to keep going. This is the story of how a grieving widow, armed with nothing but love and a stubborn tree, took on an entire HOA, and how that fight would expose secrets, divide a community, and change everything. So if you're watching this right now, maybe on your phone in bed, maybe on a break at work, maybe hiding from your own HOA meeting, stay with me, because by the end, you'll see just how far one person will go to protect what truly matters. And trust me, this is one story you won't forget. Before I tell you how the battle began, you need to know why that tree mattered so much. My husband's name was James. To everyone else, he was just another face in the neighborhood. The man who mowed the lawn on Saturday mornings, the man who waved at joggers passing by. But to me, he was everything. We met in college. He was quiet, reserved, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. But when he did speak, you couldn't help but listen. His words carried weight, like stones smoothed by years in a river. We married young, too young, some said. But we didn't care. We built a life brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck, and every inch was filled with laughter, struggle, and love. When we moved into this community, it was supposed to be the next chapter, the forever home, as we called it, the place where we grow old together. But life doesn't always care about your plans. James fell sick 3 years after we moved in. At first, it was small things: fatigue, a cough, sleepless nights. Then came the diagnosis: cancer. The word itself felt like a blade pressed to our throats. We fought. Oh, how we fought. Doctors, treatments, nights spent praying by a bedside. But the disease didn't care about our love, about our plans. It crept through him, stealing pieces of him day by day. The day he took his last breath, our home felt like a tomb. Silence pressed down on me. Every corner whispered his absence. For months, I wandered through that silence, half alive. The neighbors offered condolences, casseroles, polite smiles. But then they went back to their lives, while mine had shattered into dust. I needed something, anything, to hold on to. That's when I thought of the tree. It was James who had always loved nature. On weekends, we'd drive out to trails, picnic under old oaks, or sit by the river just listening to water move. He'd say, "Trees are patient teachers, Lily. They bend, they break, but they keep reaching for the light." So one evening, when grief had carved me hollow, I went to the nursery and bought a sapling. Nothing grand, just a young oak, barely taller than me. I carried it home, dug a hole in the backyard, and planted it with trembling hands. I whispered his name as I pressed the soil around its roots. It was my tribute, my promise. Every morning after that, I visited the tree. Sometimes I talked to it. Sometimes I just sat in silence, letting the wind rustle its young leaves. Over time, neighbors noticed. Some smiled kindly. Others looked puzzled. But I didn't care. That tree grew as I learned to live again. It was more than bark and branches. It was healing. It was hope. It was James. So when the HOA told me to cut it down, they weren't just asking me to follow a rule. They were asking me to bury my husband all over again. And I wasn't going to let them. When we first bought our home in Lakeside Gardens, the realtor sold it as a dream, a gated community, perfectly trimmed lawns, streets lined with flower beds that always seemed to be in bloom. "It's paradise," she told us with a smile. "The HOA keeps everything in order. Property values stay high, and you'll never have to worry about a thing." At the time, it sounded comforting. Order, stability, a neighborhood that looked like it belonged on a postcard. But here's the truth about perfection. Sometimes it's just a mask. Beneath the fresh paint and manicured hedges were whispers. Whispers of fines, petty disputes, power games. And at the center of it all was the HOA president, Marjorie Kellerman. Marjorie was the kind of woman you noticed instantly, not because she was kind or warm, but because she radiated authority like a badge. Impeccably dressed, always in heels, with hair sprayed into a movable submission. She didn't walk the sidewalks. She patrolled them. She prided herself on keeping standards, the right mailbox color, the approved shade of beige for doors, the exact height for grass. On the surface, it was all about property values. But beneath that, it was about control. Neighbors feared her. Not openly, of course. To her face, they smiled, waved, complimented her efforts. But in private, I overheard whispers. She fined us for leaving a bicycle outside. She threatened to sue because our dog barked too much. At first, I didn't think much of it. Rules were rules, right? And I had more important things on my mind. But when my tree began to grow, when it stood out in the uniform landscape of manicured shrubs and HOA-approved roses, it caught her attention. And that's when the mask of perfection began to crack. Because Marjorie didn't see a grieving widow trying to heal. She saw a violation, an offense to her order, and she was determined to erase it. The oak grew slowly, patiently, like it knew the weight it carried. Every new leaf, every inch of bark, felt like a victory. I remember the first time I saw a bird's nest tucked into its young branches. I stood there for nearly an hour, watching the mother swoop down with twigs in her beak. It felt symbolic, life building itself on life, hope nesting inside grief. Neighbors sometimes stopped to watch. 2. Mrs. Gomez from across the street often waved as she passed by. "It's beautiful, Lily," she'd say. Her tone was soft, genuine. She understood, even if she didn't say more. But not everyone reacted that way. Some just stared, their expressions unreadable. A few murmured about neighborhood standards and uniform appearances. I heard them, though they pretended I couldn't. Still, I didn't care. Each morning, I'd bring a mug of coffee outside, sit on the bench beneath the growing shade, and speak to James. "Remember that fishing trip we took to the river?" I'd whisper, "You swore the big one got away. I still think you just fell asleep at the line in the water." Sometimes I laughed, sometimes I cried, but always I felt lighter afterward. The tree became more than mine. My granddaughter Emma, only 7, started joining me. She'd leave tiny drawings tucked under the roots. "For Grandpa," she'd say, her small hands brushing the soil. One afternoon she asked me, "Grandma, will the tree miss Grandpa too?" I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, but it'll keep growing, just like us." That was the moment I knew. The tree wasn't just my healing place. It was becoming our family's legacy. But while I saw love, the HOA saw something else. A problem. It was a Saturday morning when the confrontation came. I was kneeling in the soil, watering the oak, when a sharp voice cut through quiet. "Excuse me, but what exactly do you think you're doing?" I turned, startled. Standing on the edge of my yard was Marjorie Kellerman, clipboard in hand, lips pressed into a thin line. Her heels clicked on the sidewalk like gavel strikes. "Good morning," I said cautiously, just tending to the tree. She didn't return the greeting. Instead, she scribbled something onto her clipboard. "Mrs. Walker, this tree is not on the approved landscaping list. It must be removed immediately." My stomach dropped, but I forced calm into my voice. "It's a tribute for my late husband. I planted it as a memorial." Marjorie's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said flatly, in the same tone you might use to apologize for stepping on someone's shoe. "But rules are rules. We maintain community standards for a reason. If exceptions are made, order collapses." "It's just a tree," I whispered. Her pen tapped against the clipboard like a ticking clock. "And yet it's unauthorized. Failure to comply will result in a violation fine of $500. $500. For a tree." I felt my breath hitch. Emma had been playing nearby with her dolls. She looked up, confused, her small brow furrowed. "Grandma, is that lady mad at you?" Marjorie glanced at her, then back at me. Her eyes were cold. "I'll expect removal by next Friday." She turned on her heel and walked away, her perfume lingering in the air long after her words. I knelt there, frozen, hand still gripping the watering can. Emma tugged on my sleeve. "Grandma, why does she want to take the tree away? Didn't you say it was for Grandpa?" Tears pricked my eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, I did." That night, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the violation. Noticed she'd left. The bold letters screamed at me. Mandatory removal. I almost tore it up, but instead, I folded it carefully and placed it beside James's old photo. "They won't win," I whispered to him. "Not this time." The first battle line had been drawn. Word spread quickly. In neighborhoods like ours, nothing stayed secret for long. By Monday morning, whispers followed me like shadows. Some neighbors offered quiet support. Mrs. Gomez slipped a note into my mailbox. "Stay strong. That tree is beautiful. Don't let them bully you." Others were less kind. I overheard 2 women at the community pool muttering, "It's against the rules. If she gets away with it, what's next? Pink flamingos on lawns." They laughed, oblivious to the pain they were mocking. By Thursday, the HOA held a meeting. The agenda, unauthorized tree planting. I almost didn't go, but something inside me, anger, defiance, pushed me through those double doors. The room was packed. Neighbors sat in folding chairs, murmuring like bees in a hive. At the front, Marjorie stood tall, flanked by her loyal board members. She cleared her throat. We are here to address a violation that threatens the integrity of our community standards. Her eyes locked on me. Mrs. Walker has planted an unapproved tree in her yard. Murmurs rippled through the room, some sympathetic, others judgmental. I stood, hands trembling but voice steady. That tree is not just a tree. It's a memorial, a tribute to my husband, who we lost 2 years ago. It harms no one. It stands in my yard on my property, and it brings peace to my family. A few claps echoed from the back, but Marjorie's glare silenced them. Emotional arguments, she said coolly, cannot override the rules we all agreed to when we purchased our homes. If we allow one person to bend the rules, the entire system unravels. Maybe the system should unravel. A voice called from the side. It was Mr. Daniels, a retired veteran who'd lived here for decades. We're neighbors, not prisoners. Gasps filled the room. Marjorie's face turned crimson. Order. I will have order. The meeting spiraled into chaos, voices clashing, accusations flying. By the end, nothing had been resolved. But one thing was clear. The community was no longer united. Lines had been drawn. On one side, Marjorie and her loyalists, clinging to rules like lifelines. On the other, those who saw the truth, that sometimes humanity must come before regulations. I walked out of that meeting shaken, but also strangely empowered. Because for the first time, I realized I wasn't alone. The week after that meeting, the letters started arriving. First, it was a fine for unauthorized landscaping. Then a warning for improper lawn edging. Next came a violation for leaving my trash bin visible for more than 15 minutes after pickup. It was relentless. Every morning, I'd open my mailbox to find another envelope, another accusation, another reminder that the HOA had declared war on me. It didn't stop at paper, either. I began noticing things. A car idling across the street, its driver glancing at my yard before pulling away. A woman I didn't know snapping pictures of my house. Even Emma's bicycle, left by the garage for half an hour, earned me a notice. Bicycles must be stored out of sight at all times. I started to realize this wasn't about rules. This was about intimidation. They wanted me scared. They wanted me cornered. They wanted me broken. But instead, each letter, each petty violation, each cruel remark lit a fire inside me. One night, after Emma went home with my daughter, I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by stacks of violation letters. I spread them out like a deck of cards, each one ridiculous in its own way. Mailbox too high. Weeds visible in flower bed. Tree not approved. I started photographing them, cataloging them, building a file. Because deep down I knew something. When bullies push this hard, it's not just about control. It's about hiding something. And I was going to find out what. It began with conversation on a quiet Sunday morning. I was watering the tree when a voice called out, "Fighting the good fight, I see." I turned to find Mr. Howard, my neighbor 3 doors down, standing with his cane. He was in his 70s, a retired attorney, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He lowered his voice. "You're not the first. Marjorie's been pulling this stunt for years." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He invited me in for coffee that afternoon. His house smelled of old books and cedar, his study lined with law journals. He set a thick folder on the table and pushed it toward me. Violation notices, legal complaints, records from the past 10 years. She targets people until they give up or move. I flipped through the papers, my pulse quickening. Families fined into bankruptcy. Elderly couples forced to sell their homes. One man sued over a shed that had been in his backyard since the 1980s. And then I saw something even darker. Property records. Homes once owned by these violators, now listed under shell companies, all tracing back to one name, Wellington Kellerman Realty, Marjorie's own company. She forces people out. Howard explained grimly. Then her company buys their homes cheap, flips them, and sells for profit. It's a business model built on harassment. My stomach turned. It wasn't just personal. This was a scheme. A predatory empire hiding behind community standards. Howard leaned closer. But here's where it gets interesting. The HOA doesn't actually own much of this land outright. They lease rights from the original developer. And guess what? That lease expires in less than a year. I blinked. Meaning, he said with a sly smile, Marjorie's empire is built on quicksand. I sat back, heart racing. For the first time since this began, I felt something stronger than fear. Hope. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Howard's words, flipping through the documents he'd let me copy. The pieces fit together too perfectly. Marjorie using the HOA as a weapon, her company buying up properties, her obsession with absolute control. The tree wasn't her real target. I was, because I hadn't broken. And she couldn't afford someone like me showing others they could fight back. The next day, I began reaching out quietly. Mrs. Gomez, who'd left me that supportive note. Mr. Daniels, the veteran who'd stood up at the meeting. Maria from the cul-de-sac, whose foster kids had once been banned from the pool for being too loud. Each of them had a story. Each of them had been burned. We met in living rooms, in backyards, even at the local library. We shared violation notices, fines, threats, and slowly, we pieced together the truth. Marjorie wasn't protecting the community. She was exploiting it. And together, we were going to stop her. The weeks that followed felt surreal. For the first time in years, the air in Lakeside Gardens felt lighter. Neighbors stopped me on walks, thanking me, some even apologizing for staying silent for so long. The new board, formed mostly of those who had once been afraid to speak up, announced sweeping reforms. Fines would be capped. Rules would be revisited. And most importantly, my oak, my tribute tree, was officially recognized as a memorial tree, permanently protected. One afternoon, as I watered the roots, Mrs. Gomez approached with tears in her eyes. "You gave us back our community," she said softly. I shook my head. "No, we gave it back to ourselves." Emma came running across the yard, ribbons in her hair, carrying a small wooden plaque she painted at school. It read, "Grandpa's tree, love grows here." We nailed it gently to the base of the oak, and for the first time in a long time, I felt peace blooming inside me. Years have passed since that fight. The oak now towers over the yard, its branches stretching wide, its roots deep and unshakable. Every spring, it bursts into green, a living monument not just to James, but to resilience itself. Children play beneath its shade. Not just Emma anymore, but neighbors' kids, too. Families gather near for block parties, laughter echoing where once there had been only fear. Sometimes I sit on the bench beneath its branches and close my eyes. I can almost hear James's voice in the rustle of leaves, see a smile in the dapple light. The HOA is different now, kinder, more human, and though scars remain, the community has grown stronger, like the oak after storm. People still tell the story. Remember when they tried to make Lily cut down the tree? Remember how she fought back? It's become legend in Lakeside Gardens. The day one woman stood against the rules, and love won. I reach out, resting my hand against the bark, rough but warm in the sun. They tried to cut you down, I whisper, but you grew stronger, just like us. And as the wind carries my words through its branches, I know one truth above all. The tree isn't just a tribute anymore. It's a promise.